Hello and welcome to Planning a Successful Move to the Cloud for IBM I. Today's webinar is sponsored by Precisely and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event today. Now, before we get to this great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you asked. And any questions that we don't get to, we'll pass along to the Precisely team for follow-up. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, next, in the handouts section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link for getting started with Precisely. Also in there, there's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. There's plenty more in that handout section, so I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom, and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. So with that, let's get to today's great presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters. We have Bill Hammond, who's Director of Product Marketing at Precisely. We've got Dan Sims, who's Product Management Director at Precisely, and Lee Walke, who's Director of Professional Services at Precisely. We'll also have Janine coming on during the Q&A to handle that portion. So, Bill, the floor is yours.
Thanks to everybody out there for joining us today. Dan, myself, and Lee are looking forward to sharing some information today, as we said, about the moving to the cloud for IBM I. And we'll kind of structure the conversation around a couple of different topics. I'll kind of kick us off and just highlight some of the challenges this migration can pose, some of the things you need to be thinking about. And then we're going to spend a little time talking about some of the planning steps and some of the things you need to be thinking about as you're moving to the cloud and you want to do that migration, you want to make sure it's successful. We're going to highlight a solution that we've got that can help you do this migration without downtime, which is a really critical area there as well. Also, in the course of our conversation, we're going to be doing some highlighting of some of the new capabilities of Assure Mimics 10 that came out late last year. There's some specific capabilities that make this migration to the cloud even more effective. And then we should have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers that might come up during the course of the presentation. So with that as sort of the preamble, let's dive in here a little bit. So as I said, I wanted to talk a little bit at first to kick us off, highlighting some of the challenges. And maybe the first thing to really talk about is, so, moving to the cloud is something we've been talking about for years, really. It's, still continues to accelerate. It's still something that's on virtually everybody's radar screen. You can do a lot of searching about why are people doing this, and generally you'll get a list that looks something like this. For different companies, some of these things are more important than others. It might be a cost-enabling sort of thing. It could be a better solution to their backup and recovery capabilities, more predictable budgets, flexibility, agility. You've probably seen virtually all of these reasons in some way, shape, or form. Generally, it's not one of them that's causing people to move. It's generally some combination of these, but at some point it becomes something that they're either seriously taking a look at or have made the decision to do based on one or, as I said, more of those reasons. So we all know these are the things that are specifically driving the generalized move to the cloud for all IT organizations. When we kind of make it more specific conversation about migrating your IBM I environment and workloads, again, there's several reasons. A lot of people we're starting to see are taking advantage of cloud and also the managed hosting options that have become available for IBM I. And there's a selection of public and private clouds that are out there that can be used. A lot of times people cross this barrier from all on-prem to either a hybrid environment where some on-prem and some in the cloud, as they're upgrading their power systems hardware. And I know a lot of you out there are probably looking at or at least considering moving to the newly released IBM Power 10 based boxes. So that can be a impetus for this move as well. Sometimes, frankly, just the growing business demands more transaction volumes and looking at how to most effectively, maybe from a cost standpoint or from an efficiency standpoint, handling those increases can also be driving that migration. And as we talked about, some people's boxes now, Power 7s and Power 8s have been out there a while, and they may be limiting that growth for some companies. And these workloads that run on IBM Is, we all know, are very demanding and high transaction volume applications in a lot of cases. So making sure that they can continue to support that growth. So those are the reasons, but we're going to highlight some of these challenges that people run into, and they're generally going to fall around a couple of things. Justifying the investment, and maybe it's an uncertain move. Maybe the company in general hasn't made a lot of a move to the cloud yet, so maybe it's uncharted waters if you think about it that way. Making sure that as you move your IBM I workload to the cloud, all those places the IBM I is connected and impact across your IT infrastructure are considered as part of that move. And then just simply the logistics of managing the migration tasks that are involved. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail in a couple of upcoming slides. We did a survey with a lot of our customers and people in the IBM I space, and just some notable pieces came out of it about why the risks here are so critical to consider before you just jump to the cloud. When we looked at it, 60% of the people report that they had delayed migration because they were concerned about the disruption to their business or the downtime it was going to cause. Almost 50% of them are spending over 50 hours to plan and execute their migrations, which is a pretty substantial investment of time. We have one customer talk about taking over 100 hours just to plan and execute this migration. That's a lot of man hours. 44%, 6 or more hours of downtime, which can be really painful for businesses. We at Precisely here with our Mimics and other HA products are well aware of the cost of downtime. So that's a significant factor in making sure that you plan these migrations as effectively and efficiently as possible. And then, almost a third of the people, as much planning as you see in these other stats that people are doing, they still ran into a really serious issue during the course of their migration that made the problem even, more acute. So it's not something that you ought to take lightly. It's absolutely something you can do, and we can help you with, looking at the planning of it and also the execution of it. But it is something that could have real material impacts to your business. So make sure that you do that effective planning and execution. When you do run into these challenges, you're faced with some, very, very bad alternatives. Roll back and maybe do it later, and hopefully you've planned enough that you can roll back to the old version once you've done the migration, or damn the torpedoes full speed ahead and continue to make unplanned changes just on the fly with the hope that even though it hasn't been tested, if I just change this thing, everything will get up and running. So, when you do run into these problems, it can put you in some scenarios that you really, really don't want to be in. And the costs of doing it wrong are significant. We think about migration, you immediately think of some of the costs that you're definitely going to have, the new hardware, for example, the expense of that, financing costs, the labor you're going to have, getting those systems up and running and those kind of things. Those are kind of top of mind. But don't forget there's some other, and I wouldn't even call these soft costs, maybe less visible costs. The potential for downtime, which we all know can be very expensive. Security exposures. You're moving your workloads and some of your key information to the cloud, making sure that you've got security, the security angles covered, and you're thinking about those. And regulatory oversight can come into play here. In a lot of geographies around the world, moving customer data, for example, off-site into the cloud can have compliance impacts. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but you need to be aware of the compliance and regulatory impact that move could potentially make. So If I've successfully made you think about, this is a significant move. If I'm going to make this migration, geez, how am I going to get through this? I'm going to turn it over to Lee Walke now, and Lee's actually going to walk you through really 4 critical things as you're planning your migration. What are the 4 steps we really recommend you go through? So Lee, why don't you take us through these 4 steps?
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Bill. Good morning, good afternoon to all attendees. It's my pleasure to be in front of you here today talking about this. So as we look at migrations, the one thing that we're really focused on, we here at Precisely, as well as customers, I have a previous life as a customer utilizing HA products, is minimizing and removing as much risk as possible to the migration. Along with that, we try and focus on removing as much downtime as possible. Downtime is money, bottom line. So the first step that we're talking about here is assessing the project scope and risks, really understanding what it is that you're migrating, what it is you want to accomplish. As you plan it out, and I would say this first and foremost, regardless of how many systems you're migrating, where you're migrating them to, on-prem, across country, into the cloud, it doesn't matter. Anytime you're doing a migration, you really want to focus on the planning aspect of it. You really want to understand your environment, not just as a system per se on some casters, but you want to basically understand everything involved with that system, right? You want to make sure that you're apples and apples on your fixes. Now, I'm not saying necessarily be at the latest and greatest. I understand that every business has their processes for when they put on fixes, but you want to make sure that you're going to an equal environment if you're not upgrading operating systems, for example, as part of this. If you're staying at an OS level, you're going to want to make sure you're at the latest you can possibly be for your environment for fixes. Because the last thing you want to do is find out a problem on your system during the migration and having to go forward and find out that, gee, this is a known problem. If I'd have had this PTF on, it would have worked. Looking at your third-party software, that's one thing. We've run into, believe it or not, some customers whose applications cannot run at past a certain OS level. So you don't want to make any assumptions. You want to validate it with your third-party software. Speaking of which, you want to make sure that you get new keys for the new systems. That is often overlooked until the last possible minute and can bite you in the keister, if you know what I mean. Doing a cost-benefit analysis to make sure that you are utilizing the most optimal methodology for your migration as possible. You want to understand what is it going to mean in this migration in terms of labor, in terms of planned and unplanned downtime. Do I have the right tape drives, et cetera, at the new location? Do I have any tape drives at the new location if I'm going to the cloud? Really understanding how I'm going to get from point A to point B in terms of my data. Speaking of data, making sure that your data is prepared and cleansed, meaning you don't want to bring over obsolete data. You don't want to bring over a large file with a bunch of deleted records. If possible, as part of your planning, you'll want to do file reorgs and everything and only bring over necessary data and not stuff that's dirty or obsolete or anything like that. Security, big word these days. Security settings, functions, integrations. You want to have time and place to be testing those because you want to prevent those vulnerabilities during a migration and especially at go live if you don't test appropriately. You want to verify that all your hardware components are mapped out appropriately. Do I got the right external drives? Do I got the right comm devices, networking devices? So it's not just the people doing the system migration, if you will, to the cloud or to another location. It's really making sure that you have system knowledgeable people to place the order that is has everything that you're going to need in it. Are you consolidating locations into the cloud? Now you're going to need more horsepower, for example. So just some things to think about. Speaking of the media, do you have compatible media devices on both the source and the target ends, meaning where you're coming from, where you're going to? If not, you need to make sure that you have a way to transfer the data appropriately, whether that's via the wire or via some other mechanisms. Again, speaking of consolidating locations, for example, or reducing the amount of footprints going to the cloud, you want to make sure that you got all your networking, your VPNs, your FTP, et cetera, all ready to go and being able to handle any additional system loads that come about. What you want to do is you want to basically have a timeline, you want to have a documentation, you want to have it all baselined out, you want to have strict management processes before, during, and after the migration. Application requirements. Do you have any obsolete applications? Do you have any applications that are going to be refreshed as part of this? You don't want to just ignore and skip during the migration. This is a perfect opportunity to get rid of obsolete. We talked about obsolete data. This is an opportunity to assess your applications and remove anything that should be cleaned up. And the other thing is, as you move environments, that's a great opportunity to upgrade operating systems. Why? Because of the migration is taking care of the downtime that would associate with an OS upgrade. So call it killing two birds with one stone, et cetera. So you need to have a plan for that. Are you going to upgrade and then migrate? Are you going to migrate and then upgrade, et cetera? So there's other things you can do in conjunction with the migration, but the more you add to it, again, the more critical that the planning becomes. Moving on to step 2, which is really after you've assessed your environment, you want to basically select the best migration methods, and there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of ways to get from point A to point B. Everything from lift and ship a piece of hardware somewhere, all the way to doing migrate while active, which we'll touch on here in a few moments. But basically, you need to determine how you're going to get from point A to point B with the data and other critical objects to the new machine. What we're going to focus on is really 2 methods here. You can kind of see that on your screen now. You should be able to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the bottom one first, which is the tried and true traditional System I migration methodology, which is tape. And you can kind of see here, and the one thing I want to point out without going into all the arrows is focus on the red part. That is your hours of downtime. So to just try and simplify it without talking to the chart, think of it this way. When I migrate a system, if I'm doing it via tape, the first thing I'm going to do, other than planning, let's say it's the time of the event now where we're going to migrate, first thing is I'm going to kick off my users, right? I'm going to get everything quiesced, nothing's going to go on that system. Now I take my save. From that point on that I kick off my users, that starts the downtime clock. Those users are going to experience the downtime until we give the go, no-go decision on the new migrated to system. So that entire time, from the time of the start of the tape save, until the time you ship the tape, until the time you restore the tape, until the time you're able to test and validate, that is all downtime to the user. As I mentioned, briefly, I used to be a customer. And when I worked for a very large company, a very large manufacturing environment that we had HA in place for worldwide manufacturing. There was nothing shipped or built without these systems available. So they were absolutely A1 critical. And that downtime for a migration without using any other methodology, just tape, save, restore, was a minimum, and I say minimum of 48 hours. Sometimes it was less, a lot of times it was more, the window that we asked for. So your mileage is going to vary. You might be able to get by with a tape, save, and restore migration because your RTO, your RPO requirements are such that you can handle that type of outage. The majority of businesses today, though, cannot tolerate a significant outage, as Bill mentioned up front with some of the statistics. So that whole red section there, that is your downtime from the time of the tape save till the time of the restore, testing, and go live, and switching your users over to that new piece of hardware. That is all downtime. Now, let's compare and contrast to the top arrow there, or the top set of arrows, which is utilizing replication, for example. You can see the difference in the downtime because with migration utilizing a logical replication solution, you can do all of this stuff up front. You can do all your setup of your replication to the new target system. You can do testing on that new target system during the day when most IT people would like to work rather than off hours, holidays, weekends. You can do all kinds of testing. You can do unlimited testing. You can test once, twice, 3 times. You can bring in certain users. You can do whatever you want to do with the comprehensive test plan and not affect any downtime to the users. So fast forward to that red arrow there. The cost of downtime utilizing replication is pretty simple. At the time of the cutover, from the time I shut off and quiesce the system until the time I switch the connectivity and bring my users back to the new piece of hardware, that is my downtime. So in essence, I've gone from, in my old environment, I went from a 48-hour outage on average down to approximately 1 hour to be able to quiesce the system, do the connectivity switch, bring your users online, because all that testing, all that restore, all that data replication has been taking place for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the schedule determines. So that is a significant difference between the two methodologies. Again, it may be overkill for replication in some environments that can tolerate a longer window or have smaller systems. Just know what you're getting into and know the true cost of the migration solution that you choose. So moving on and executing on your plan, right? Many factors and decisions are involved in really designing and executing your plan, right? You want to follow the hit by bust planning methodology, meaning you don't want all the knowledge in the head of somebody who could all of a sudden be out of the job for an extended period of time due to illness, injury, or worse yet, leaves the company with all that knowledge, right? That's why you want to document your plan in full, make it as detailed so that, think of it as being able to give to somebody who's not been involved in any of the upfront planning and giving them the documentation that says, this is how we're going to migrate the box. That is the ultimate planning guide. If you can do that, you've achieved perfection in the documentation area. And that's what you want to strive for. Strive for documenting the processes so that you could give this to somebody with no knowledge of the environment and be able to do the migration. Don't forget about the other people too that are involved, right? You got people in other lines of business that could be impacted by this migration. You could, you've got other projects that are going on. You've got busy seasons, you've got regulatory audits that Bill mentioned, et cetera, all kinds of things that could impact your plan. So moving on to step 4 then, bottom line is you want to document appropriately, right? And then you want to test. Documentation and planning, number 1, testing, number 2, or 1A, or basically 1 and 1 asterisk. I mean, they're the most important parts to any migration, the upfront planning and validating, right? You want to do rigorous testing of the environment. It's critical, which you want to build that into your time window. If you're doing a tape saver store, for example, you want to be able to build that in. Replication, you can do that as part of the process. Whenever an issue is found and you need to address it, the testing should be repeated to ensure that the problem was in fact resolved by whatever fix methodology you have chosen. Ensure all the security settings and functions are fully and properly configured. Verify all connected devices, network systems we talked about, especially if you're replicating to a SIM. You want to make sure that that has been tested and validated. Validated that the data is in the same state as your pre-migration baseline. So that you basically, I don't know, it could be running queries, it could be whatever you deem necessary to validate the data. Somebody getting on and looking at it, maybe executing a test transaction. If you're utilizing replication, that would be analogous to performing multiple runs of the audits prior to your actual cutover, and also upfront testing, making sure that you can access the system, making sure that users can see the applications and data and access them. We talked about license keys, et cetera. So all kinds of things going in there. And I know I've gone through this kind of quick, but I think hoping through that course, what we've done is we've exposed some things that maybe you haven't thought about for an upcoming migration, or validated what you have done in the past or what you're planning on doing is on track. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to Dan Sims, who's going to talk to you about Mimix 10 and other while active technologies. Dan?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lee. This is Dan Sims speaking. I'm product manager for the IBM IHA portfolio here at Precisely. And we've been doing what Lee describes for a long time. And managing risk and downtime for migrations it really sums it up in a nutshell. There are a lot of variables, and Lee did a great job talking through some of the things to be thinking about. So one of the things that really makes a big difference when you're migrating, of course it depends on the system we're talking about here, right? But many of our customers are running extremely high value enterprise backbone workloads on IBM I, and finding downtime and managing risk are very critical on those workloads. And so many customers find that using Assure Mimics type technology, and of course we have other products, Itera and QuickEDD, same thing, allows them a significant advantage to managing risk and downtime. So we have been, of course, we've been using our technology for a long time, but we're also doing enhancements to it that are notable to make it easier. And we're going to continue to do that. So I'm going to talk to you about a few here that came with Mimics 10. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is the journal-driven configuration. This is a shift from the traditional Mimics configuration methodology. This is now based on journal-driven. It's really now based about your journals, based on your journals. So now some shops might already have Mimics installed with their journaling all situated just fine, and there's no reason why you need to change anything. So if you're replicating with your data group configuration today that works from A to B, and now you need to migrate from A to C, you should just use that same configuration. But maybe you have a system that is never been replicated with Mimics before, and you need to come in and it's got journals scattered all over the place. You may know that we always want to consolidate journals in the past. Well, with the journal-driven configuration, we don't have to do that so much anymore. This allows a configuration to be built much faster. So we can just use the journal-driven configuration based on your existing journals. We can set up catch-all data groups that will take care of everything else that's not journaled, and away you go. So that's going to significantly improve how fast we can build a configuration for migration. The other thing it does is if you have a library with multiple journals, objects within it configured to multiple journals, it's going to make that so much easier whether you're migrating or not. So that's a key feature that came out in Mimics 10, journal-driven configuration. The next thing, probably more directly relevant to migration, is the sync by wire. So Lee talked about it, and we've talked about cloud here in MSP hosted environments, but traditionally what we're talking about migrations is going from where you are now to something new, right? That may be cloud, that might be hosted, but it also very well might just be some new hardware. Maybe you're going from Power 9 to Power 10 within your premises, or maybe you're doing some data center consolidations. Maybe you need to integrate an OS in there. And as Lee described, as the variables stack up, it becomes more complex. So we see a real need for sync by wire to be able to synchronize a system over the network. And you can do that to a new data center, to a new cloud or hosting site. You can do it from one OS level to another. So we, in Mimics 10, invested in synchronization improvements to improve the sync by wire. So if we're talking about cloud, LPARs are often scratch loaded. So you have a base OS with nothing there. And OS maintenance is typically done by the user. So for cloud, specifically, full system restores may be challenging. Now, some of the cloud providers do offer mass storage devices and VTL in the cloud and things like that. I expect that to mature, for sure it will. But It's not like the old days where you have a tape device always available to you. We're just not seeing that. So sync by wire can be used to seed that system and get it ready. Shipping tape becoming less and less practical. So you can start up the scratch installed LPAR and bring everything over the network. Okay, so a little bit more about this synchronization improvement. So Mimix 10 intelligently evaluates the state of the backup objects now to choose the most efficient synchronization method. So this came out as of Mimix 10.0.05, enables more frequent automated updates to backup objects for improved overall data integrity. Object synchronization at pace with fast-changing cloud computing environments. That's just a general statement about sync via the wire. And one thing we really focused on is a lower impact on the production system. So you have to continue to run the business on the production system. And so we don't want to affect that while we're syncing to the target. So we focused on that. I like to use the term a traffic cop to make sure that we get the job done, the traffic flows to the target, but we don't interrupt the production system. So, and then some of the things we really focus on is reducing the requirement for a user or a technical consultant to monitor the synchronization activity. So these are some things, synchronization improvements in journal-driven configuration that we've added into Mimix 10. And so I actually am going to turn it back over to Lee now to talk about some migration services. And then once he finishes up, I'll come back and talk to you about some additional solutions that we can use that you might not be thinking about. So Lee, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. All right, so really quick here, because I'm keeping a close eye on the time. I know everyone's time is extremely valuable. We're going to focus now on utilizing logical replication to accomplish a migrate while active. So what do I mean by migrate while active? Go back to that one chart of the arrows, right? Migrate while active is basically minimizing as much as possible minimizing as much possible downtime as there could be. So what do you want to do here? It'll cover all the needs that you have, whether it's just a system upgrade, whether it's you're consolidating data centers, whether you're moving to new power hardware, whether you're moving to the cloud like we're talking about today, or to take advantage of it for application and or OS upgrades. So it's very, very, very flexible in the terms of what it can fit. So bottom line is it's a combination. When I talk about migrate while active, it's logical replication along with many years of expertise and knowledge in performing migrations. I can tell you right now that my team, this is the #1 service we provide for our customers, is assisting them with migrations, right? Because what we can do is we cover all the needs, the data, the applications, identifying and replicating and taking care of all your critical objects. And the beautiful part about this is we are hardware and OS independent. I can go from any IBM OS to any IBM iOS. So if you want to, I mentioned earlier about combining projects into a migration. What we see often is a lot of times they will migrate, or rather upgrade OS levels as part of the migration. So they'll go from N on their current box to N+1 on the migrated system. We could care less about the storage. We could care less about any of the physical attributes. Bottom line is you tell me where to replicate to, and I will get the data there. Whether it's next door, whether it's in a different data center, whether it's the cloud. Now, I don't care if you're going from internal storage to external storage or any combination thereof. The bottom line is we see it all as data, we see it all as transactions, and we will get it from point A to point B. So how does this all work? Again, we use the products to provide the engine to replicate, whether it be Mimix, Cook, EDD, or Itera. The audits are absolutely critical in this. When you do a tape save restore, right, you're at the mercy, for example, that the tapes are good, that the tape devices are good, et cetera, that nothing bad happened to that save. With replication, you are replicating that data in real time, and we're validating through real-time audits and real-time error resolution. We are basically in a live environment ready for you to use for anything you need to, testing, whatever. So it gives you an expanded window for testing rather than trying to sandwich the most critical testing in the minimum amount of time for a 48-hour outage, for example. We've got, as I mentioned, we have people on our team. I'm the young guy on my team, right? As you heard here, even between Bill and Dan, I'm the young pup on this call at 17 years at Precisely experience. I'm the youngest in terms of service time here at Precisely from everybody on my team, project managers and consultants. So this is what we do. This is all we do. We live it. We breathe it. And it's the experts that provide really the key here. Everything from the installation and configuration. And the configuration is interesting because you don't have to be a current HA customer to take advantage of logical replication. We have customers who do not have a need for HA or DR. They utilize logical replication just for minimizing risk and minimizing downtime for a migration. We monitor the environment, we help you validate the data on the new system, and we're there to help you cut over to the new system. And one of the key parts to our methodology is we will run through what's called a migration readiness checklist prior to your cutover event to give to you to ensure that you're ready to go. And if we identify anything that could put your migration in jeopardy, we will point it out to you and let you make the decision on your business case whether you move forward or not. So it is really, it's not just a tool in the toolkit, meaning the product. It's really the expertise and the knowledge behind it to take a look and say, yes, this migration is going to be successful, or you're going to be in trouble if you proceed. We take care of all the critical objects and data. I've yet to run into anything in a migration that we couldn't handle through our products and getting over there. And as I mentioned, we're seriously agnostic in terms of the hardware, in terms of the operating system, and in terms of the configuration. So you can go from 1-to-1, you can go from one server to multiple servers. You can consolidate one from many into one. I mean, whatever you can imagine, we can do, because again, all we're doing is replicate. It sounds so simple, but it's simple in the fact that you don't have to have like hardware. You don't have to have like storage. You don't have to have like OS. You don't have to have the same infrastructure, as a matter of fact, as this shows. So very flexible in its use, and provides a lot of advantages in terms of planning as well as testing, which I mentioned was absolutely critical. And it's all about, again, we started at the top of the broadcast with this, and we're going to kind of wind it down and reemphasize that migrations are all about a high-risk project. What Migrate While Active does is it minimizes the risk and minimizes the downtime. Everything's running in parallel, minimal downtime at cutover, and we're there from start to finish to assist you, because this is what we've done for many, many years, and we are considered experts in this area. So, and the last piece here is really migration and HADR setup in the cloud, for example. So you can migrate from on-prem to the cloud and then protect from there. Again, very flexible in how it's used out there. Dan, I think this is where I turn it over to you to talk about the other while active technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. I'm just going to go back to the previous slide for just 1 second, and I do see some questions in the queue, which I've answered a couple of them, and we'll try and get to your questions. So thus far, we've mostly been focusing on migration of an LPAR, for example, from an old piece of hardware to a new, wherever that may be, as Lee said. So I'm going to introduce a couple of other use cases that are also worth considering that we can help you with. And the first one is the encrypt while active. So somebody said it on this call that security is really taking a high profile out in the industry today. And encryption is a very, very powerful technology to use to increase your security posture. So a lot of people are looking at that. Precisely does offer Assure Security that has encryption options, but you may not really, if you really haven't dived into that solution, what you're really doing is you're changing every bit within a column of a table or a file, right? So if you have more than one column, let's just say, for example, you got to encrypt your credit card or your social security number or any other data that is deemed sensitive, you have to do that in every single row of each column that you choose. So you are changing that, and some of our customers, as I said before, have huge files and they're critically important. So it takes a while to do that. I've spoken with some customers, and we've done Encrypt While Active, where they were talking about 34 hours of downtime. Another one, we're talking about like 35 days of downtime. It's a daunting situation. So Encrypt While Active basically manage downtime and risk when encrypting large data sets by combining the encryption features of Assure Security and Assure Mimics Promoter. So real quick, the first phase, copy the data from the production file while it's still in production to a encryption enabled file. So we start with 0 records in the new file, enable the encryption, and just copy it over record by record while you're still running in production. Once it goes from 0 to 100%, once you're at 100%, it goes into idle mode and keeps it there in sync, so new changes that are made are applied to the new target. And then at the appropriate time, going back to Lee's planning and scheduling, you would go ahead and promote that file. So you can do this in cooperation with a regular LPAR migration right there. You can incorporate this into your project plan. Encrypt While Active. The next one I want to talk to you about is application upgrade while active. Very similar to what I just talked about, except you now need to change the format of one of your files. Same deal. You've got to change every single column, or sorry, every single row of the columns that need to be changed. And if you're talking about a terabyte file, that's a big, daunting task. So we can offer you some help with that. Manage downtime and risk when changing large data sets using Assure Mimics Promoter. So again, we would copy while you're in production to a temporary file and do the reformat on the fly. Okay, and then once you get to 100% copied, you go into idle mode, and at the prescribed time, you would go ahead and promote that. And when you might wonder, what does a promotion mean? Well, really, what you're doing is you move the old file and its access paths, logical files and access paths out, and you move the new file in. So move the old one out, move the new one in. And so one thing to keep in mind is don't forget your Mimics replication or your logical replication. So make sure that those move operations will be performed on the target as well. And then you'll always be in sync, always be switch ready. Okay, so the third one I'd like to talk to you about is the compress while active. And this is the same idea as the first two, except now we're getting rid of deleted records. So we simply copy over the active records 0 to 100% and then go into idle mode. And then when you're ready, you take a little outage and you move the old one out and you move the new ones in. And it's notable that IBM does have the RGZ PFM command. It's perfectly fine. It works great. You can do it while active. If it were me, I would use that first, but you may run, if you have huge data sets with constraints or triggers and things like that, you may be running into a daunting challenge, and this is where the compress while active using Mimics Promoter can help you with that. So these are some options to think about. You can incorporate these into your migration plan and do them in kill two birds with one stone, as Lee said. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bill to close us out.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. I just had one slide I wanted to toss up for you guys, and it's more of a reiteration of things both Dan and Lee have already said. But, we've done this a lot, the migration solution for a lot of customers. There's a list of some of them, not all, and that's not a comprehensive list by any means, but as Lee pointed out, we've been doing this for years. We have the expertise on staff. This is a challenging and, potentially problematic move for a lot of people. And, to the extent that we can help you with this, we're here and ready and able to take care of you. So I think we're at the point now where I'm going to hand it back to Janine, and we can see what questions are in the queue that the three of us could help answer. So Janine, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, we do have a lot of questions. So first question is there a way to be sure my IBM I is optimized and in good shape before I migrate it to the new location?
That's a very good question. Yes, there are a couple of things that we can help out with there. There's what we could do is what's called an HA assessment, which goes in and is a high-level scorecard of your environment. That may be sufficient enough. It's as I mentioned, it's just a cursory review of your overall replication HA environment, and it'll tell you how that environment is, if there's anything that you should be concerned with. There's also a more detailed what we would call an environment audit, which would actually look in deeper, if you will, into your environment. And of course, we could always package it in with what I would call the second set of eyes. If you're doing a migration and you want someone just to, hey, are we on the right track here? We're going to be cutting over this week. We can help out with that, adding a second set of eyes, doing detailed audits, et cetera. So yeah, everything from an HA assessment at one end all the way to a detailed audit or a second set of eyes prior to migration. So there are multiple ways we can help you out if you're looking for that warm fuzzy that the migration is going to go well and that you take care of everything. Also, even just those are standard offerings we have. We can always get with you and talk about specific needs you have, whether it be reviewing your planning, et cetera. So there are all kinds of ways we can help you ensure your environment is migration ready. Good question.
Great. Thanks, Lee. And you know what I forgot to mention? For our attendees, do check out those links that you see on the slide. Those are live links. So be sure to click on those. They will open in a separate window for you and be available following the presentation. Okay, next question. What are my options if I cut over to the new LPAR and it's not working?
Great question again. Wow, I like this audience. Though, if you're in a tape saver store, for example, you need to build that in your pipeline, backout plan and process. With logical replication, you can keep your other system around. So let's say I'm replicating and I've done my cutover. That original system is still live and there. What a lot of customers don't do is they don't start replicating back right away. As a matter of fact, some never replicate back at all. That system is there in case you ever need to roll back to it. So let's say you get over there, you're starting to execute some business and you realize, you know what, this is not right, this is not well, we got hardware issues, we got connectivity issues, whatever, we can revert back. It's as easy as switching your users back to the known point prior to the migration. So back out and recovery planning is very simple, utilizing logical replication.
Greatly, and this one's sort of connected. What is the best way to test my application works prior to cutover?
Oh wow! Again, a great question. You're limited in a tape saver store environment because you're doing it all at once. So there's not a lot that you can do ahead of time, right? With a logical replication solution, i.e., migrate while active, that new system that you're going to be migrating to is live and active and is being replicated to. So it's as easy as utilizing, I suppose, a function called virtual role swap within our product, which will basically allow you to do destructive testing on the new system. And I'm really simplifying this, so bear with me. So you can tell the product, I'm going to enter a virtual test mode. You can go in, you can do whatever you want to that system. You can update data, you can delete data, etc. And when you're done, you tell the product, hey, I'm done with my testing. And for lack of a better term, Mimics, Itera, etc. will put Humpty Dumpty back together again like it was prior to the start of the test. Again, there's a lot of detail in there, but at a high level, that is the recommended process. And you can do that multiple times, 1 time, 2 times, 10 times, however many times you want. It's just there are some caveats, meaning you wouldn't go into a virtual role swap for a week at a time, for example. It's meant for a shorter duration test, but there's that and other options that we have for validating your environment ahead of time.
Great. Okay. So what if my application is 24/7? Is there any downtime? Does that make sense?
There will always, yeah, there is. And there is downtime only because you do have to switch your users over, right? So that in and of itself is the downtime. How do I switch my users over from box A to box B? Whether that be, manipulating a DNS, whether that's shutting off an IP address here, turning it on here. There will be some time regardless. So if anyone tries to tell you they have an absolute zero downtime migration, don't buy a used car from them. There's going to be a minimal amount of time just to switch your users over. So there's time there that they're active on this box. During that switch over time of the connectivity, they're not accessing the box. So there is that downtime there. But again, it's very minimalized. That's really the amount of downtime that you have is to switch your connectivity and your users over to the backup system, or I'm sorry, to your new production system that you're migrating to.
Okay. So next one, kind of a statement here, but I assume journal-based configuration is similar to what you're using in Itera. Is that correct?
Yeah, I got that one here. And hello, Amir. It's similar, but it's also different. So the journal-based, automated journal-driven configuration is built on the concept of if you configure a data group for a journal, if you have a journaled object, it's replicated to that journal. If it's not journaled to that journal, it's not replicated, period. So that's the basis for that one. And that's a little bit different than Itera, but they are similar. And I would say that Itera for a long time did have a configuration advantage when there was, scattered journals all over the place over Mimics, because you would have to add the include exclude. So that's probably the biggest thing now, where with the automated journal configuration, you don't have to have that include exclude configuration task anymore. That's huge.
Great, thanks, Dan. So can we aggregate the network at cloud end for more bandwidth?
Yeah, I'll take that one as well. And I don't think we are the people to ask that question to. I think that should go to your cloud provider. We're the data replication folks, so that's the best we can do on that one.
Got it. Can we migrate directly if my current OS is version 5R4 and install the latest OS, say 7.3 or 7.4 in the new server?
Yeah, Lee, why don't you take that one and I can jump in if needed.
I was going to say I don't have the matrix up in front of me, so if you can take it, feel free.
Sure. So probably not. So we typically support 2 levels of data replication, and so 5.4 to 7.3 or 7.4 would be an awfully big jump there. You could go 5.4 to 7.1 or something like that, and then from 7.1 to 7.4. That's a big jump. So the typical is 2 OS version levels. So, but you could, I will say, we probably wouldn't support it, but you could maybe install the software and it might work depending on your app.
All right, Dan. All right.
level.
So a question about the encryption function for financial industry. Is it available for the migration of HSM devices?
Yeah, now we're starting to get it. Let's see, is it available for the migration for I don't think I know enough to answer that question, and the encryption discipline is more of a security related, not a migration related one. So we might need to follow up with you on that one.
All right, great. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thanks everybody. Great conversation. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card is Julie Viken from Minnesota. So congratulations to Julie Viken. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Precisely for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.